Most folks tend to shy away from thinking about their own passing, but it's a certainty that comes for all of us, sooner or later. What few realize is that, according to records left by one of the most studied men of the last century, the process that unfolds after our last breath is far more organized and surprising than we might imagine. For seniors in particular, this spiritual journey takes on unique shades, tied to the years lived and the emotional baggage accumulated over time. According to accounts analyzed over decades, the soul doesn't immediately detach from the earthly plane. There are stages that unfold in sequence, and the 33rd day after passing marks one of the most significant. It's at this moment that an elder's spiritual consciousness reaches a turning point, a stage where profound choices begin to emerge. This discovery was made through carefully documented sessions and brings up questions many people avoid asking during their lifetime. If you've ever wondered where the soul of someone who passes in advanced age goes, you might be about to find answers that go far beyond what traditions or dogmas suggest. The most impressive information revealed over the years indicates that this 33-day period isn't random or merely symbolic. According to the analyzed records, the soul undergoes a gradual process of detachment, revisiting significant moments, acknowledging mistakes, successes, and relationships that shaped its journey. This time allows it to reorganize memories, adjust emotions, and begin its preparation for what comes next. Subscribing to this channel and liking this video helps keep this kind of content available, bringing more clarity on subjects we'll all face sooner or later. There's much that isn't yet understood, but with each new analysis, what seemed mystical reveals itself as part of a profound and intelligible process. When we speak of the soul of an elder, we speak of a spirit that has already experienced losses, triumphs, strong bonds, and, often, silent regrets. Cayce indicated that these elements directly influence what happens after passing. During the first few days, according to him, the soul still remains close to the physical reality, observing, feeling, and sometimes trying to communicate. It's a transitional phase where the spirit begins to detach from matter, but still carries impressions from the last phase of life. In the most detailed accounts, it's possible to note that this interval is marked by recurring visits to familiar places, known voices, and memories of simple moments, like a conversation in the backyard or the smell of coffee in the morning. At this stage, the spirit doesn't suffer, but observes with unprecedented clarity what previously went unnoticed. It's a phase of silent self-awareness, where one recognizes the impact of their own existence. As the weeks pass, and as the time approaches 33 days, this awareness becomes sharper. The soul begins to let go of the emotional ties and pains that accompanied it for decades. Cayce described this as a subtle, yet definitive moment of liberation, where the spirit begins to see its journey with a broader perspective, free from the filters of vanity or denial. It is in this phase that what he called a deep emotional review occurs, a type of affective inventory, in which the elder reviews their choices not by what they achieved, but by what they built in the people around them. Unresolved relationships emerge with clarity. The soul perceives whether there was forgiveness, true love, or just coexistence. This process, though invisible to the living, is described as intense and inevitable for every spirit that wishes to move forward in peace. Day 33, therefore, marks a kind of division between the time for looking back and the moment for accepting what comes next. In the most consistent records, there is mention of a threshold that can only be crossed when the soul understands that its passage has left marks, good or bad, and that these marks need to be understood. For an elder, this is especially relevant as their story is long, full of branches. Children, grandchildren, old friends, neighbors, all these connections are revisited with impressive clarity. At this point, according to Cayce, the soul begins to attract or move away from specific vibrational planes, depending on the quality of these relationships and what still remains unresolved. There is no external judgment. There is, however, a kind of deep self-reflection that guides the next steps. The soul chooses, based on its level of understanding, where to go next. This understanding doesn't happen by chance. It is the result of a process that begins immediately after the last breath and intensifies as the days go by. In the case of elders, whose lives were marked by more cycles and more lessons learned, this process tends to be even more detailed. Cayce reported that older souls often take a bit longer in this stage, not because they are lost, but because they have more points to integrate. It's as if the soul needs to stitch its memories into a coherent quilt before moving on. The 33rd day, then, doesn't just represent a number, but a symbolic conclusion of a cycle of spiritual reintegration. From then on, other phases begin, but all depend on what was understood at that exact point. What becomes clear is that life continues, even after the end, but at a pace that respects each soul's own timing. After this point of transition, the soul begins to experience a different sensation, as if it's being called to a new space. This isn't a physical place, but a state of consciousness where it's no longer confined by memories of the earthly world. For elders, this is especially significant, as many passed on carrying worries about family, health matters, or unspoken feelings. Cayce explained that the soul, upon passing the 33-day mark, enters a kind of orientation room, where higher spiritual forces act as guides. They don't give orders, but help the spirit understand what still needs to be worked on before a new cycle. In this stage, there are no punishments, but rather an invitation to understanding. It's a silent and profound moment, where the soul listens more than it speaks. The learning continues, and each soul proceeds at a pace consistent with its inner readiness. This subsequent phase also brings a new perception of time. The soul no longer experiences days as we do. According to Cayce, the spirit begins to experience everything simultaneously, as if past, present, and future merge into a single field of consciousness. For those who lived many years, this means reviewing not only their own actions, but the effects of those actions across generations. A kind gesture made in 1974 might now be seen in its repercussions on grandchildren, or even great-grandchildren. The same applies to unresolved grievances. At this stage, the soul is able to perceive how each attitude resonated. This does not happen as a punishment, but as a natural part of continuous learning. Cayce said that this type of clarity is what most transforms the spirit. There's no going back to fix things, but there is a way to understand, accept, and prepare to start anew, in a different time, in another condition. However, not all souls reach this point with the same readiness. Some, especially those who lived bound by resentments or denied their own truths, may resist the call to move forward. Cayce observed that this is not uncommon among elders who passed with a sense of an incomplete mission or unaddressed feelings of guilt. In these cases, the soul might remain in a prolonged state of waiting, revisiting experiences or staying close to family for longer. Even so, even in these situations, the process continues. The difference lies in the pace. Some souls advance with more lightness, others with more caution, but none are abandoned and all receive constant guidance. This part of the journey is deeply respectful, as it takes into account each person's unique story. There is no rush, no imposition. There is only a clear direction, to learn, accept, and evolve. At 33 days, when this symbolic division is reached, the soul doesn't vanish or immediately merge with something greater. On the contrary, it maintains its identity, its memories, and even a certain form of spiritual individuality. This contradicts some popular ideas that speak of complete dissolution right after death. Cayce was clear in stating that the spirit remains conscious of who it was, but without the limitations of the body and the illusions of the ego. For an elder who has lived decades of experiences, this awareness can be liberating. It's at this point that many reported in the sessions feeling a kind of active peace where judgment disappears and gives way to understanding. The soul recognizes its flaws, but also sees the value of the small virtues it cultivated. Kindness to a neighbor, dedication to family, silence in difficult times, all of this takes on new weight. What once seemed insignificant now reveals itself as essential. Another aspect Cayce frequently pointed out was the reunion with familiar souls, not as if they were scenes from an old movie, but as real presences that appear to welcome or guide. For many elders, this includes life partners who have already passed, children who left before them, parents, and even friends from youth. These reunions are not meant to create attachment, but to facilitate the transition. They are moments of emotional reconnection that help the spirit release the last ties of fear or regret. In many accounts, this type of encounter occurs precisely after the 33-day period, as if it were a reward for having gone through the process of inner review. The spirit feels recognized, and this propels it forward. There are no words in this contact, just a mutual understanding. The soul, upon seeing these familiar faces, comprehends that love is not lost with death, it merely changes form. Cayce emphasized that, after this stage, the soul is ready to make bigger choices. It can choose to rest, to learn more, or even to prepare for a new life cycle in another time and space. This decision is not made by an external entity, but by the soul itself, now more lucid. In the case of elders, this often involves the desire to mend what was left undone, or else to move on in peace, aware that they did their best with the resources they had. It is a moment of spiritual autonomy. The spirit doesn't feel pressured, but rather motivated to follow the most suitable path. Life experiences are not ignored, but transformed into wisdom. And all of this begins to solidify from that key point, 33 days after death. It's when the past ceases to weigh heavily, the future doesn't yet press down, and the present becomes the only place where the spirit truly exists. In this more subtle state of existence, the soul begins to understand that every stage of life had a purpose, even those marked by pain or failure. According to Cayce, there is no wasted time from a spiritual perspective. Everything serves the soul's learning. For elders, this realization is liberating, as many carry the feeling that they made too many mistakes or failed to do what truly mattered. In this new level of consciousness, however, it's no longer about weighing rights and wrongs on a scale, but about comprehending how each experience shaped character and understanding. Even regrets gain a different meaning. What was lived becomes integrated, and what was unresolved, understood. This is the difference between pain and wisdom. The spirit no longer seeks justifications. It begins to see the whys, not with guilt, but with clarity. And this redefines what we call spiritual rest. Many elders who have had near-death experiences reported sensations similar to those described by Cayce. There is no darkness or emptiness, but rather an expansion of consciousness that brings clarity. One of the points he most frequently mentioned is that the soul does not lose its connection with those who are still alive. On the contrary, it accompanies, protects, and in many cases, positively influences the paths of those left behind. This doesn't happen as a constant presence, but as a vibration that connects at important moments. For children and grandchildren who feel longing or seek answers, this might be perceived as sudden intuitions, vivid dreams, or even a feeling of comfort during the hardest days. The soul, even on another plane, maintains love as its bond. According to Cayce, this love does not diminish with distance. It adapts and manifests in ways that common awareness is still learning to recognize. That's why the 33 days are so symbolic. They represent the time needed for the soul to complete its initial passage, as if it were crossing a bridge between the physical world and the more subtle realms of existence. During this period, everything accumulated throughout life is reviewed, not in haste, but with depth. Cayce never stated that all souls react in the same way, but he made it clear that all go through something similar, each at its own pace, each with its own way of feeling and understanding. For an elder who has lived a lifetime with ups and downs, this process is an opportunity for rebalancing. The spirit begins to understand that its story doesn't end in death, but continues as part of something greater. This continuity is what makes mourning more bearable for those who remain and more understandable for those who depart. The soul doesn't disappear, it transforms. After these 33 days, the spirit also begins to perceive with greater clarity which behavioral patterns were repeated in other lives. Cayce frequently spoke about the idea that the soul carries memories of previous existences and that the present life is an opportunity to resolve what was left open before. For many elders, this means understanding why certain pains, fears, or challenges recurred so often. The soul, now more awake, begins to recognize these repetitions not as punishments, but as chances for healing. This understanding paves the way for more conscious future decisions. The soul gains the freedom not only to choose new paths, but to shed old burdens. The 33-day cycle is, then, the beginning of another, even broader process, in which the spirit ceases to be reactive and begins to act with greater clarity regarding its choices and responsibilities. This leads us to reflect on how we live while we are still here. If everything we do, feel, and fail to do will one day be revisited with such clarity, perhaps life needs to be lived with more awareness. Cayce never used a moralizing tone in his words, but always pointed to the importance of intention. He said it's not what we do, but why we do it, that truly matters on the spiritual plane. For elders who look back with sadness or regret, this message can be comforting. There is always value in effort, in care, in the attempt to do good, even when the outcome was not as expected. And this understanding, according to him, is what allows the soul to move forward with greater lightness. The 33 days are not a final deadline, but a symbolic marker of transformation. It's when the soul finally understands what it came here to do. There are no records of suffering in this process described by Cayce. On the contrary, the accounts indicate a sequence of steps aimed at reconciliation and growth. This doesn't mean everything is easy, but rather that everything makes sense when seen from another plane. The soul doesn't flee from the truth, it faces it, and in doing so, it frees itself. For those who have lived many years, this journey can bring relief as it shows that life had a purpose, even in moments when everything seemed lost. This knowledge, once shared, can help not only those who have passed, but also those who remain. Understanding what happens to the soul after death brings peace, and by knowing that there is a respectful, just, and profound process, perhaps we can face the end of life not as a rupture, but as a natural continuation. Everything goes on. Only the form, the time, and the awareness with which the next step is lived change. This understanding also transforms how we view aging. When we realize that the last years of life are not a preparation for the end, but for a new beginning, everything gains another dimension. Cayce mentioned that old age is a phase of spiritual synthesis, where the soul draws closer to its own essence. It's not just about taking care of health or staying active, but about internally reviewing feelings, relationships, and unfinished business with more attention. What is put to rest in life doesn't need to be resolved later. This doesn't mean there's a formula or an ideal to follow, but that every step of forgiveness, reconciliation, and love has real weight in the soul's journey. To the eyes of someone approaching the end of life, this perspective can be comforting and even liberating. After all, it's not about erasing the past, but about integrating it with dignity and understanding. The idea that everything dissolves with death loses ground in the face of these accounts. What Cayce revealed is that there is continuity, purpose, and intelligence in the spiritual process. The soul does not go astray, nor does it wander in search of answers. It is guided, accompanied, and invited to understand who it was and what it still needs to develop. For elders who have wondered if it still makes sense to try to improve, this view offers solace, no matter the age or what has passed. There is always something to learn, to resolve, or to offer, and the more conscious this disposition, the smoother the transition will be. The 33 days are not an indecipherable mystery, but a window of time in which everything reorganizes for the next stage. Knowing this changes how we look at life and what comes next. There's no need to fear, but rather to understand, and the more one understands, the more serene the path becomes. Many family members feel something different during this period, without being able to explain it. Some report vivid dreams, others feel a calm presence nearby, and there are those who receive subtle signs like music, smells, or sudden memories. According to Cayce, these manifestations are not coincidences, but reflections of the ongoing spiritual process. The soul, still connected to the physical world, may try to communicate symbolically without words. It's how it expresses gratitude, affection, or even farewell. For someone who has lost an elder loved one, paying attention to these small experiences can be comforting. It's not about seeking supernatural answers, but about recognizing that the connection continues, albeit in a different way. This helps in dealing with grief, bringing understanding, and even hope. The bond between souls is not broken. It merely adjusts to the new conditions of existence. In the most profound accounts, Cayce asserted that the soul, upon passing this stage, enters a phase of rest and preparation. This is not inactivity, but a state of balance. The spirit rests from the tensions of matter, physical pain, emotional worries. It's a time of assimilation, where everything that has been understood begins to be incorporated as wisdom. For an elder who has gone through so many losses, challenges, and changes, this pause is like a spiritual embrace. The soul isn't extinguished, but strengthened. It gains new energy, new understanding, and, in time, a new mission. This moment has no fixed end date. Each spirit follows its own pace without haste. What matters is that, by the end of this 33-day period, the soul is no longer the same. It no longer carries the burdens of life, but the lightness of what has been understood. And that is the true turning point. To die, according to Cayce, is not an act of disappearing, but of continuing on another level. Life proceeds with different senses, different laws, but still with the same purpose of evolution. For elders, this idea can be liberating. It shows that every gesture lived had value, even if it wasn't recognized at the time. Suffering was not in vain. Love, even in silence, left its marks. And all of this goes with the soul. Knowing this brings more meaning to the final days and more serenity to face the inevitable. After all, what is to come is not punishment or mystery, but merely the next step in a process that began long before birth. When this awareness is accepted, death loses its weight. It becomes merely a return, a reunion with essence, a restart on another plane of existence. Everything continues, only in a broader and truer way. If this content brought you some clarity, please share this knowledge with those who need it. Share this video with someone who might be going through a difficult time or who has lost a loved one. And if you wish to continue receiving insights like these, please subscribe to the channel. This simple gesture helps us keep this conversation open and accessible for everyone. What Cayce left us are not ready-made answers, but paths to understanding. And for those who have lived a long time and seen it all, perhaps the greatest relief is knowing that the end is not the end. The soul continues its course, carries its history, and transforms its pains into wisdom. At 33 days, it finds clarity, and from there, it walks with greater lightness wherever it needs to go. The most important thing is to know that no one truly leaves alone, and that every life, however quiet it may have been, leaves a trail of light along the way.